Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to our viewers. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We are streaming live from the Government Information Center. Over the last 3 days, we have had about 40 journalists at the NAMPA offices here at the Government Information Center, where they have been learning the tricks and the tools about election reporting. So today's program is part of the training program, and we have in studio some experts to share information with us about social, political issues that are uppermost in the minds of the electorate. So my name is Zoe Titus, and thank you for joining us. Allow me to introduce our illustrious panel, and starting from my left, Ms. Linda Baumann. She is the program manager of the Namibia Media Trust and a very highly noted human rights activist. Right next to her is Dr. Basilius Kasere, lecturer in philosophy at the University of Namibia. Right next to him is Martha Nangolo, a researcher with the Institute for Public Policy Research. And lastly, Dr. Philip Santos, a lecturer in media at the Namibia University of Science and Technology. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. So to set the scene, we are approaching our 2024 general election, and key social and economic issues are at the forefront of public discourse. Amongst these are issues like social justice, job creation, and economic development through big investments like oil, gas, green hydrogen. These are particularly pressing. The distribution of economic benefits and the ability of our government to address unemployment, for example, and promote social equity will significantly influence voter perceptions and priorities. We hope, we think. What do you have to say? I am going to use first names, I hope you don't mind. Basilius, help us to situate ourselves here. When we speak about social justice, what exactly do we mean? We need a definition so that we can just situate this discussion, because that's going to be the foundation of the discussions this afternoon.
Okay. Thanks, Zoe. The whole definition of social justice, controversy on its own.
Summarized version.
Yeah. Great. Almost thought about a lecture of it. I think when we speak about justice, we're saying, given the kind of society in which we live, how can we ensure that every person is able to live a life that is worthy of a human being? How do we then avail the socio-economic resources in this case so that every person has access to them, for them to be able to live the kind of life that is required to actually live as a person? So you then look and say, what is the definition of a happy life in the Namibian context? What sort of goods should you be able to access, that once you have access to these goods, then it's said to be that you are living a life that is acceptable within that particular context? So you're talking about access to quality education, access to quality housing, access to food, decent employment, and decent wages in this case, but also protection, social protection. And the freedom to be able to live within that particular. I think social justice then say that we should then create systems, structures, policies, and programs that will avail these kinds of goods to every Namibian.
Thank you very much. And those issues become increasingly important during an election year, not so?
Yeah.
And why?
Well, because those are the things that people are looking to actually have access to. And it seemed, especially not seemed to, but in the Namibian context, very few people are able to access those particular goods. And in some cases where they access these goods or these particular goods, it is not decent. Think about employment, for example. majority of Namibians, 80% of employed Namibians, I think, earn below $10,000. That's not a decent income. It may be a wage, but not a wage adequate enough to provide for you a desirable life. So in the election here, government actually said, well, we probably not, I mean, they probably will not say that they failed, but they, well, we didn't do enough. If you give us another chance, we are going to do better. And that's why these particular issues are always used as I think as bait, actually, in this case, as bait for more for votes or to actually gain the voters' trust. Yeah.
Thank you. Martha, the IPPR has been doing substantial research on big investments, oil, gas, etc., and has on several occasions tried to put that into to a particular context, trying to make people and also policymakers understand the impact of such investments on our economy and on the general population. What should voters, I think, understand about the link between these big investments, these large-scale investments, and social equity? And then, Dr. Santos, I'm going to ask you, how should journalists be reporting on that to make it understandable and relevant to their audiences?
I think it's about understanding, as what Dr. Basilius said, what's accorded to citizens. From our standpoint, we are of the opinion that when we're talking about green hydrogen, we're talking about oil and gas, what does it mean to the layman's, to the grassroots? How does it trickle down to the average Namibian? How do they benefit? Does it mean that we're going to experience a high influx in job creation? Are we talking about subsidies on gas, on fuels? Are we talking about electricity being subsidized, et cetera, et cetera? So these are some of the issues that we're talking about. But also, I think it's also understanding, I think especially when we're talking about these high investments, we at IPPR are of the opinion that government in terms of policies should be pushing agendas like being a part of the EITI. Journalists should be looking at issues of pushing the ATI bill, for instance, how to get that on board. So these are some of the issues that we've been looking at.
Can you just expand on those acronyms that you use?
AITI is the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, and ATI is the Access to Information Bill.
Thank you. Dr. Santos, you wanted to speak about journalists and journalism in this context.
Okay. Maybe let me look at it within the framework of social justice, as has already been alluded to by my colleagues. So journalism is really the nervous system through which all social processes are communicated across the stakeholders, all stakeholders in society. So with regards to social justice issues, I will use the Fresarian framework to locate the role of journalism. So the things that Basilius described really speak to what we refer to as distributive justice, which is the distribution of economic resources. But there are also other dimensions of justice, for instance, the cultural elements, recognition of groups in terms of gender, ethnicity, and things like that, which can also shape the way people access economic resources. So when there are deficiencies in either of those dimensions, people need a platform through which to express their concerns, through which to make justice claims in respect of either distributive justice or in respect of either cultural arrangements which limit them in terms of their access to distributive justice and other social justice issues. So the media operates in various ways to make this possible. They inform the citizens about the state of affairs in society so that they understand where things are and their position in it, in society. And also social justice issues tend to have very complex structural elements to them, some of which are not easily understandable by ordinary people. And it is the role of the media to break this down, to show how, for instance, in African societies, it is usually the case that key natural resources tend to be owned by international majority stakeholders rather than local stakeholders. And these issues have huge structural, complex structural elements to them which require some significant breaking down, interpretation, and that will be the basis on which citizens can then take action in terms of either voting or lobbying for particular transformations at that structural level, and so on and so on. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And Linda, that is your cue, because Philip was speaking about other elements, and that's exactly where you come in, because you work with marginalized communities, communities whose voices are absent from media spaces. Can you speak to the issue of social justice, and can you also put that particularly in the context of elections as you have seen it play out?
Yeah, I believe that the issue around social justice carries a number of realities as explained by fellow panelists, but also it is rooted in communities. And within that diversity, there is the most important word that speaks in social justice, the realities of inequalities. And when we talk about those inequalities, we are reflecting on communities, we're reflecting on the realities of access to their basic needs, but also access to equitable lifestyle that they're able to live with no reservations around worrying to get a glass of water or food anyway. And I think that social contract is the social contract that defines social justice between the government and also the communities that we are living in. That initially linking it to election perspective, that initially speaks to the promises that come from these political parties to us as communities. And this is where we have to take that level of responsibility as communities to be able to see what elections promises are that are given to us, and also how that fits within the current realm of realities. We've seen year in and out in our countries that, and I love the word that was used by Basilius around, we will improve the efforts. It's not that thing about we failed. There's always this promise that comes that illuminates us to know that, oh, there's a possibility. However, we haven't done as citizens that reflective analysis on the previous promises towards the new promises that we're getting. So having to strike a balance around those issues requires the media to play a critical role, to go to marginalized communities, communities that are not reported on or underreported, but also broadly the greater analysis that are required to be able to set a clear tone whether this political parties who are participating in elections are really having the issues at heart that we need changed in this country. And I think it's mainly elections constantly take us back to bread and butter issues, and those realities are the realities that we are faced with as citizens. And that initially speaks to whether the social contract that is being drawn up between us as citizens and the political parties, whether those social contracts are really speaking to what we require. But also the main thing there for me has to do with the recognition of the diversity, how inclusive they are, but also how equitable their distribution and access is for people to be able to have better lives in our country.
Thank you, Linda. But we're in a bit of a conundrum, aren't we? You speak of a social contract, and those social contracts usually take the shape of the manifestos, and we don't have many of those available presently. So, Basilius, that manifesto would be that social contract that speaks to the social justice issues, a political party's ideology, its position on what? Green hydrogen, oil and gas, employment, unemployment, youth development. What do we do as citizens, as voters, in the absence of these social contracts?
I think, Zoe, that we find ourselves in a society where sort of our political environment is such that citizens don't have much that they can do once they have elected their representatives. Even though we are a representational democracy, there's not really much of representation going on. But also, a society that is politically accustomed to not honoring what they have promised. So there's been no consequences in the past, and therefore a manifesto in this case is it's actually worrisome when you see a manifesto, because then you know it's another lie again, because people are not used to being held accountable or even to being honoring, living a kind of politics of honoring what they have promised before. So citizens in this case, I think this year, I would sometimes think that maybe in the beginning of the campaigning year, it's where communities must come together and say, these are the things that we expect of our politicians, whoever is going to be elected. And we want to see how you're going to make it different. However, because this is not a direct representation, a direct, I think this is an indirect presentation, not direct, the Namibian system. It's a direct representation.
Yeah,
okay. Because we are in a direct representation, the person that we vote for can actually go and do whatever it is that they do up there, and just in 5 years' time step down. We can't remove them. And I think if there was a sort of an agreement between the electorate and the elected, that if you do not perform, we give you a year or two to perform. If you don't, we take you down. If there was such kind of thing, then voters would actually have more leverage to participate in the political game. And in this case, there's not much really around that. So, and sadly, the manifestos that are being cast right now are all literally last-minute manifestos. And you expected that you wanted to hear right early in the year, what are these political parties going to be doing? What do they think about education, about healthcare, about inclusivity? I mean, we've literally we're about to criminalize people of different sexual orientations. All of those kinds of things are stuff that you want to hear in the dialogue of an election here, right at the beginning of it, not when you've got a few weeks running. So the kind of manifesto that we are now seeing from my personal perspective does not really inspire much confidence. It might be over-promising like that of the PDM that you find, but I'm not sure if the voters are really confident that these manifestos are going to be honored at the end of the day. Yeah.
Zoe, I think it's important for us to really be reflective on that question of yours.
Yeah.
The question is, do political parties respect Namibian citizens?
Yeah.
Because if manifestos are coming out 2 months before I need to elect, when is the critical analysis and interrogation going to happen from us as citizens? So that has been a culture that we've been having, and we need to come to a stop around it. Because right now you have 3 parties that released, and you have a list of 20. That initially tells us as Namibians that there's a lack of respect on the level of intellect that we are having as Namibians. Because basically at the end of the day, it's one of those things that they're basically telling us that Namibians don't read, they don't interrogate, and that is problematic. So we need to also be responsive as citizens so that we're able to hold these political parties liable and responsible to their manifestos. We cannot get a manifesto at the end of the year. I need to get it in the beginning of the year so that journalists can also have an opportunity to reflect, interrogate, and really reach out to communities to be able to reflect on whether these promises that are given to us are really realistic. Because some of these promises are just dreams that I feel that they are messing with us as citizens in this country, which is time that we need to also hold them accountable at all times.
Philip, Martha, please go ahead.
I was going to say, I agree with Linda, but I think one of the things that we also have to take into account is that consistency. We can't just wait for election year to go through manifestos. It doesn't work like that. What have we been saying ever since independence? What have we been saying the previous elections? Have what was done in the previous elections been fact-checked? What's the progress into it to do it now? And I think that's where media comes into playing a big role. How far are we? What's SWAPO doing? I mean, they're the ruling party at the end of the day. How far are they doing? How are they ruling the government, et cetera, et cetera? And I think these are some of the issues, the key issues that we're not focusing on.
I was going to ask that very same question, or something very similar to Philip. There are expectations of the media to take those manifestos, be they a 20-page manifesto or a 300-page manifesto, and break it down for listeners, viewers, etc., in palatable bits and pieces so that they can understand and be informed and make informed decisions. What is your view? Do journalists currently have the capacity? Do our newsrooms have the capacity? are there sufficient resources available to facilitate that?
Let me link the two. So the first problem that seems to be bothering people is that the manifestos are not there. But there are many ways in which parties can communicate their programs with or without a manifesto. And from a journalistic perspective, which is where I'm speaking from, journalists can really put political parties on the spot about their programs, demand answers about what the parties stand for, what are they promising, what is in the offing for citizens. In the absence of that manifesto, journalists can still probe. I mean, even in the U.S. election, for those who are following the U.S. election, some of the complaints that have been raised are that some of the political candidates have not really provided a detailed program for what they are going to do for the American people. So it's still the same scenario, but it doesn't stop journalists, for instance, from probing, from demanding answers, because that's their job. They can't wait for a political party to make a document which is labeled a manifesto available before they can do stories, before they can ask questions, and things like that. That is this type of journalism, is to ask questions where there are gaps in information, to ask questions that allow citizens to have a picture of whatever it is that will help them to make a decision about who to vote for and who not to vote for, what programs to promote by selecting particular representatives and which ones not to. So that is the role of the media, in my view. It is proactive, it is not passive. The media cannot be passive in an election season. And also, I think we overplay the significance of the document. What matters more are the ideas that a political party communicates about what it seeks to do, which can be communicated through statements to the media, through news stories, and other such platforms. Because documents can be there, and they've always been there. And I think, as Martha indicated, the starting point would be to go back to documents that have been made available before and ask questions about whether or not the programs that were outlined in those documents have been achieved. And if not, what is going to change with this particular election and the coming 5 years?
So there certainly is need for a more focused and active drive by civil society and Namibians in general. I mean, you are raising issues of accountability, and there is very little pressure from citizens to hold those in power to account. And you make a very interesting point. We are very excited about the fact that we now have an access to information law that will become operational very soon. But what people tend to forget is that journalists have been doing investigative journalism for thousands of years without an access to information law. This law is going to make it easier, we hope, but the journalistic principles and the integrity and commitment to that code of conduct, it's there, and journalists can access that information if they practice the diligence that is required of the sector. But I know that our audience, which you will not be able to see, have some questions. This is your opportunity. Please come to the podium. Yeah?
The audience to come closer to you. I think there's also your question. I want to also flip it around and reflect on how access to information is not utilized by political parties to bring information to journalists. Yes, it is our responsibility to go probe and reflect on previous documents, but it looks to me that political parties only see the media as a form of bringing what they feel the media needs to know. And that also becomes a little bit of a problem because as a citizen, I'm in the middle. I have the media here, I have the political parties. I'm dependent on the information that I access through media because I have no access to political parties. And that initially says that there is a need for us to really cultivate and re-energize political parties to be proactive. We keep asking the journalists to be proactive, but the people that we are interviewing and talking to are also not proactive. Even if you come with a very direct question and ask them, we are doing analysis on X, Y, and Z, they will take 2-3 weeks to be able to answer. And when you have a good story out of it, they want to react now. And I think those are conversations that we need to have. Capacity in any sector will always be a problem. It will always be lacking. There'll always be a need. But I can tell you that the Namibian media has stretched themselves from a community level to the commercial world. There has been greater stretch where visibility and really tackling the issues are been taken forth. But sometimes the institutions that we are working with or trying to get information out to communities are really repulsive towards those questions because they feel the issue of accountability is not to the media, it is within their own institutions. And I think it's a bigger conversation that needs to happen so that parties are able to know that the media is a medium of really bringing out information and building this country. And I think sometimes there is a bit of a challenge really to make sure that we get the media to report according to the angles that have been identified. And sometimes your story has to change because 3 of your experts just choose not to respond.
Thank you, Linda. Another issue that I wanted to raise when it comes to the issue of access to information, and rightly so, we are going to have many, many more discussions about this because we have to make access to information part of our social fabric, and that is not currently the case. Our access to information law requires that we release information proactively, which means that someone should not actually have to go to a public institution to ask for that information. It must be available before it is requested. That is the nature of proactive disclosure. But it's a culture change that we seek, and that takes time. Philip, I'm coming back to you whilst we are waiting for our audience. They're queuing up. I'll come back to you in a bit. Let's take our first question.
Good afternoon, panelists. My name is Linnea Dishena. I'm a journalist with NAMPA. I have a question. My question is, politicians using these serious social issues as baits, can that constitute perhaps as a crime?
As a crime?
No, I don't think it constitutes as a crime.
Can it be, because like you say that currently in Namibia there is no leverage to account these politicians to.
Yeah, I mean, there's no crime against using that as a leverage or to gain votes, but it appeals to a character issue. It becomes a moral issue that if you can actually use the penitent social issues in order to attract votes by promising that we are going to do this if you vote for us, and you do not do that, that is actually a sign of leaders who cannot be relied upon. It's a character failure of our leaders. And I mean, it shouldn't be criminalized. It's freedom of speech. You can promise as much as you want, but at the end of the day, it should actually tell you something about the character of the kind of leaders that we have. And I think he's just referred to the issue of documenting, and that is documentism. And we think by collecting a number of documents over years that we have attained something. And therefore anyone can write a manifesto that is very promising. Again, a manifesto can be a form of just clickbaiting, it's a bait kind of a thing that you use to attract people, but you do not live up to it. So again, accountability issues of leaders that are morally upright, that are trustworthy becomes an issue because you can use that promises but never delivering, and that is the biggest problem. Again, we are not respected as people because there are no consequences for people who promise and do not live up to their promises.
And that also speaks to the part that we hardly speak in our country, the different ideologies and approaches that are being used in politics. We've seen in Africa, populism has become the tactical approach to be able to get that bait. And that comes with charismatic
Yeah.
personalities, because what they will be doing is pick an issue that knows that this particular group that we are targeting will be able to be smitten into. And that's just part of the different intersectional ideologies that are being used politically to be able to ensure that they are able to appeal to the audience. And I think in this country, we haven't even, as journalists, haven't even done analysis on the type of characters on this leadership that we're having, in order for us to be able to also see from what ideological background are they speaking from, and also what is their stance around it in terms of actioning those ideologies. So looking at it as a crime, there's no legislation, but I think we need to really analyze the individuals and their issues that they're putting forth and how it relates to us as citizens.
I'll look at the characters.
Good afternoon, panelists. I'm Pinky Correras from NASTFM. I would like to pose my question to Dr. Santos. Ms. Titus did speak on the mandate of journalists to make information palatable to the electorate, right? It's not everybody that is going to sit through an 80-page manifesto and go over it. It's not everybody that is able to understand the wording of these manifestos. My question is, why is there not an initiative, especially introduced by the ECN, to hold these parties accountable for not coming out with manifestos on time? Because it makes this job very, very hard for journalists. If you're coming out with a manifesto 2 months right before elections, it's not giving us enough time to analyze this document and actually sit down and say, okay, this is what we can tell the people, this is how the people can consume this information. Why is there not an initiative brought about by the ECN to say, okay, the calendar comes out in February, this is when your manifestos are expected, and this is when they should be out. If not, you should be disqualified. Other parties have been disqualified for lesser reasons. In my opinion, money is not more important than your promise for your country. Why is there not such an initiative by the ECN, and why is it not something that is being pushed?
I think that would be overstretching the boundaries of a democracy to demand, to make such boundaries which mandate parties to do certain things at certain times. Ideally, in a democracy, the cost of not providing citizens with a program of what you want to do and how you are going to do it should be losing an election.
Yes.
Ideally, that's what should happen. So it's unfortunate that the electorate then doesn't use that power, because that is really where their power is. It is in the party's best interest to sell itself to the electorate. So the manifesto is actually an opportunity for a party to present itself as the best option of all the contestants that will be there, and say, this is what we want to do, this is how we're going to go about it, and use that as the persuasive device for inviting the electorate to put them in office. And if they don't do that, the cost to them should not be the ECN punishing them, it's the voter not voting them into office. Yeah.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Charles Shetindi. I'm a journalist and media practitioner. I have just a few questions, I think, to the panelists. Again, it's about the issue of manifestos. I want to know from you your opinion. What is your opinion on the weight of a manifesto on deciding, on helping the citizens deciding on who to vote for? Do you believe that they really have that weight, that they can actually convince someone to vote for a certain party or not to vote for a certain party, especially when you consider how different are they anyway from one another? How different is a PDM manifesto from a SWAPO manifesto? If they are promising the same things that any government should be doing anyway, social issues, we are going to address housing, we are going to address healthcare. These are things that any government should do anyway. What about ideology? How is that really, does it come out in manifesto? And then I also have another question. I think the moderator is coming back, pushing me here. We were talking earlier here about the PR system that Namibia uses for elections, especially the National Assembly, where we use the party list system. And I think a point was made from the panel to say this does not really represent the people that we vote for, because the party decides. These are my people, you vote for them. So at the end of the day, especially for the National Assembly, they are not directly, responsible, so to speak, for a certain constituency or so on. And there were a lot of debates around this issue as to whether maybe it's now time that people move to a different system, like a ward system and so on. I just want to hear your opinion on that as well. I have many questions, but I'll stop here for now. Yeah.
Oh, all right. The weight of the manifesto. I think from what Santosh just said now is that the manifesto is a sort of a program. The worst thing or the bad thing, not the worst at the moment, the bad thing with most of our manifestos is that they are not written as programs. They are written almost like promises that you give to a girl when you're in love with her, And I think what those manifestos should look like is that here is the plan that we have for this country. If you give us the power to be the government that you are going to vote in, this is how we are going to carry it out in 5 years' time. Not, we are going to provide clean water. Where? Is it when you build 5 houses and provide water? Where are you going to provide water? Because that's such a broad thing. We are going to provide housing. Where? Okay, and when? Okay, we are going to improve education. What is the problem with the education system? You're not stating the problems. You're literally just saying great stuff over dinner with a girl that you just saw and you like her, and everything is just coming out, and it sounds intelligent, but it's not really sensible, because there's no program in place. And there is none of the manifestos right now that is a program. They are all just promises. It's almost, if anything, you should actually, if you are intelligent enough, just shelve it among political fiction, because that's what most of the manifestos are. So the weight of a manifesto that it must be a program of, say, 5 years, come 5 years. This is how what we want to achieve, and this is how we will achieve it. Because at the moment, everything that PDM is saying is also what SWAPO is saying, because these are not programs. They're just, and we get excited about them. You should not be promised stuff that you are entitled to as a citizen. Like, we'll give you pension, we'll increase pension. That's what you're entitled to as a citizen. Okay, we will improve healthcare. You are entitled to public healthcare in Namibia. You can't be promised that. Because, again, let me leave it there for now. The second question was, should I answer it, or maybe somebody else should take it?
Go ahead.
Okay, your second question was on let me just recall that. The party system, whether we need a different system. I think with democracy is mature. But in our case, it seems to be as if we've got static democratic systems. What we have been using since 1990 is what we have stuck with. We haven't even revisited and say, okay, probably for the first 10 years it was needed, since we didn't know what a democracy is. We've never had an elected government. But after 10 years, let's rethink about how representation should look like. We can't use a party list system anymore, because now we need to really hear, there must be real involvement with the people on the ground, so that whoever is coming as a representative is truly representing the interests of the people and is directly accountable to the people. We need to be seeing more of politicians really coming to beg communities for votes, and that is not happening. The party list system does not beg for your votes. It's almost known that you must be of a particular ethnic group and of a particular church denomination, and then you belong to a particular political party. It's a given. If you are born in that particular part of the region of the country, you vote that. There is no demand from government or even the ruling party or any other party to demand anything of you or even come and beg you. You are simply a machine already born and programmed to vote for that particular party. But if we had a different voting system, then everyone would actually know that these people are demanding things from us. They are holding us accountable. And I must go in 5 years' time back to these people who will tell me that we are not giving you our votes because you have never lived up to what we mandated you. Or they can even withdraw you after a year and say, well, you are being irresponsible. You're not representing us. Get off. We need another representative. So I think we need to revisit what we call our representative government at this moment, so that it must progress with the times, it must change with the times and really respond to the Namibian needs. Yeah.
Martha?
I think to answer the first question, one needs to ask, what are these parties promising? What are they saying? And do they speak to my needs and my wants and my preferences, et cetera, et cetera? Do they speak to what I want to see the country headed, where the country is headed to in the next 5 or 10 years? And it's not only in the next 5 years. What is the trajectory? Looking at it on a 10-year scale. I look at, for instance, the national development plans. Do they speak to what the national development plans are saying? To what Vision 2030 or what Vision 2063 is saying? So I think when you're looking at, like, for instance, I saw one of the parties had a two-page manifesto for a 5-year trajectory for a country. That's a joke. In my opinion, that's a joke. That's not even a love letter like what Dr. Biselius was saying. That's not a love letter. I'm not going to accept that. Last year, we had one of the independent candidates tell us that they were going to revive 4, factories. She hasn't even revived her own factory. What is she talking about? So it's things like these that we need to look out as the electorate. So I think that's what you should think of when you're looking at the weight of a manifesto. And then to address the second question, I agree with what Dr. Biselius is saying, that, in the beginning, that was maybe what we needed, but now we really do need to look at things, look at other countries and what they're doing. We've got more than, I think Linda said, 20 different parties here in Namibia. Do we really need those different parties in Namibia? Are they really going to speak to the needs of the country and where we're headed? So these are some of the things that we really need to look. And one of the things that bothers me as not only an expert, as Zoe would say, but also as a youth, is knowledge. Are we really equipping ourselves with the knowledge that we need to move forward with the different topics, the different issues that as a country that we're facing? We're facing unemployment, we need jobs. We're being told that green hydrogen is going to bring about how many? 600 jobs, 600,000 jobs. Where? How?
And when?
It's a specialized, industry. How is it going to bring that to the normal Namibian that's in Havana? You need to ask yourself these questions. So these are some of the issues that I would bring about.
Yes. When I look at the manifestos that are coming out, even in the previous years, I ask myself whether these manifestos have been consultative with the communities. Because if you go to the communities who you also know, for instance, has got a majority of a particular party, they don't even know what the content is. That initially for me is alarming. And the question also goes back to whether these political parties know that the document is a requirement, but not an absolute requirement for us to be able to get our agenda forth. Yeah. So the question remains for me is, does this manifesto help? And if this manifesto does really help, do they have internal processes that does reflective checks and balances to see progress? Because that's where political parties are able to say, in 1 year, we promised you this, we did this. But I don't think they come back to us with analysis before presenting to us a new manifesto. And that initially speaks a lot to the question that we all have in this country. Do we vote on issues? Or do we vote on loyalty to parties? Loyalty. Or individuals, or whatever it is that we are calling. And you've mentioned quite a few groups around race and all of that. So the issue is, are we voting because we believe in the discourse that is being set for the next 5 years? Or are we voting because there's loyalty from childhood of 18 years when you had to go and do your first vote? And that initially speaks to the issue about whether this manifesto is just rewarding those in power.
In a democracy, by virtue of being human, being a citizen, you are entitled to certain things, and Basilius, you alluded to those things. And as a country, Namibia commands vast resources, mineral wealth, natural resources, I mean, you name them. But Philip, you alluded earlier to structural challenges, historic structural challenges. Please break that down for us. so that we can understand, this complexity of, these wants, and if those wants can be delivered on.
Okay. Yeah, I think I was speaking about that in the context of what the media can or should do, which is to help the citizen and the voter understand the context within which they exist and within which political contestation is also happening, and also within which promises are met and in which they are not met. So there are things that are achievable within the scope of the resources that we have. But there are also other bigger structural arrangements which limit countries that we refer to as the global south in terms of achieving their goals, in terms of maximizing beneficiation from natural resources in particular. And these have to do with the with who controls the economy, basically. Where are the means of production controlled? Who has the resources to benefit from the natural resources that are in a country or in a region? And we know that countries in the global south are basically producers or sellers of raw materials. And we do sell these raw materials at prices that we don't determine. So we literally are told how much gold is, how much diamond is, how much this is. And we sell these things as raw materials, which means the prices are lower. And then we have to import capital goods like machinery and finished goods that are going to be produced from these resources at a higher price, which means our import bill will be likely higher than our export bill, which affects the economy, affects currency. And also the lack of capital also means that we don't have the capacity to exploit our own natural resources and also even to produce value-added products from them. How those arrangements limit our own ability to improve our lives from the resources that we have need to be understood, so that there is also political activism at that level to change some of those arrangements, so that countries in the global south, such as Namibia, can benefit from their resources in a big way, not in a token kind of partial way as is happening right now.
Thank you very much. We have to wrap up, but I'm going to I'll ask you to allow us to ask our panelists for a closing statement, very, very brief closing statement. There are so many issues that we've not been able to deal with, but we'll park that for another day. Your closing statements, please. Linda, you go.
This is a big year for us as Namibians. We need to be reflective. We need to be engaging in critical thinking and hold political parties accountable, including the state at the end of the day, because this is our country and the future of our children. So we have to take responsibility as citizens.
Well, I'm glad to live in a country where we can vote democratically and our voices can be heard. And I would like to think that for every Namibian that is voting this year, vote for a responsible government, a government that is concerned with the needs of Namibians, especially a government that has a vision to iron out the socio-economic inequalities and the remaining beads of economic colonialism that we still experience, because those are the big issues. It's about the future of every Namibian and the future of every Namibian child, and that's why this year really matters for us. Yeah, thank you.
I think take the time to reflect, as Linda had said, study what these potential parties are promising or trying to do and what they have done, and look at what the two, where they stand, and really make an informed decision on where you want to be, and where you want to go, and who you want to represent you moving forward.
Information is stock in trade at a time like this. Whatever decision people have to make at any point in time between now and November is dependent on the quality of information they have. and that puts a lot of burden on the media to make sure that citizens have got quality, credible, valid information to make informed decisions.
Thank you very much, Philip. You've taken the words out of my mouth. And with that, thank you very much, everyone, for deciding to spend your time with us this afternoon. We hope to see you soon.